If you're combining the spaced repetition flashcard software Anki with immersion in the language, then I believe that motivation to learn the language could depend on how big your new card backlog is in Anki, assuming that you're making the cards yourself. You might recall one of my previous videos called I Used Anki Wrong for a Year, where I was basically using the hard button instead of the again button on top of making poorly made flashcards. In this video, I'll be explaining the aftermath of that situation and how learning a language and putting the flashcards that you make into Anki can affect your motivation in the future. Let's get into it. My hypothesis is that motivation is correlated to backlog size. The combination of flashcards plus using Anki means that you're basically creating your own deck, and you're using vocabulary that you find to feed Anki to learn something new every single day. Since only a fixed number of cards to you are shown every day, if you end up creating more than that fixed number for a single day, then you'll basically have a backlog of cards that'll be shown to you for the next day. If you have to replenish that backlog every single day, then you have motivation to immerse in the language and find new grammar and new vocabulary. And basically, you can't waste the day by going a single day without having new cards. You always have to have new cards for Anki to be fed to you every day. So let's say that theoretically you spend a lot of time every single day creating new cards, and then you end up with a very, very large new card backlog. Now this is a nice sense of security, which means that you can technically go a day without having to immerse because you always have new cards coming in, but there is a little bit of a dilemma that arises. If you have a very large new card backlog, and if you're adding more cards on top of that, that basically means that what you come across today could be actually shown to you in Anki weeks or months later. Now this means that you should stop making new cards and catch up on that backlog, right? If you don't add any new cards, then you might feel like you've kind of paused learning a language, but this could mean that you might your listening and your reading skills might decrease, which is bad. What I've concluded to a certain degree is that motivation is inversely related to the new card backlog size. Don't worry if you're not a math whiz, this isn't too complicated. If you have a few new cards, and that means that you have the motivation to go out there every day and immerse and get new cards to review every day. But if you have too many new cards, then you're basically increasing the time from when you first see that information to when Anki shows it to you. You have this burden over your head of trying to get through that backlog. You don't want to add any more cards to it. So put yourself in my shoes last year with 3,300 new cards in Mandarin. I had this really absurd philosophy of making an Anki card out of every word I came across and not being able to tolerate ambiguity at all. For example, if I came across a new word, then I'd make a card for it. But in the dictionary, they have all of these different related dictionary entries, which would be like maybe 40 or 50 different entries. And I would put all of those in Anki as well. And this was without any context or any example sentences for the vocabulary that I was making. Given that I had 20 new words coming in every day, there was no way I was getting through 3,300 cards anytime soon. Some of these words you would find in real life, but other words they were more literary terms, and some are just straight out archaic, to where you wouldn't even need to know them, or you would never even see them in real life. And other cards that I made were grammar structures, which I had no context for, because remember, I didn't make any example sentences for these. Having this big of a backlog could mean that I could come across a word one time, and then maybe many months, or maybe even a year later, I would actually get shown that card to me in Anki. I was so sick of this big mistake that I made, but at the same time, I didn't want to waste that potential knowledge by deleting it. So this year, spring break rolled around, and I knew that this was my big chance to get through everything. So over the course of 8 days, I increased my new card threshold, which is the amount of new cards I get shown to you every day, from 20 to 300. And this isn't 300 repetitions every day, this is 300 new cards every day, up from 20. So it stacks up exponentially, so it was really torture. I ended up going through about 2,300 out of 3,300 cards because I suspended the other 1,000, which consisted of archaic words and I think the names of provinces in China and stuff like that. But yeah, that was 2,300 cards reviewed in 8 days, which was so torturous. I did feel a lot of relief after having done that, but now I kind of had a new problem. Since I tend to do my cards later in the day, this really screwed up my sleep cycle for the next couple of weeks. On top of my normal immersion for the day, it was so painful trying to brute force all of those poorly made terms into my head. And on top of college work and life, it was just way too much. So on the night of April 27th, 2021, I finally called it quits and, okay, listen. I would have deleted all of the cards if I weren't a data hoarder, but what I did is that I suspended all of the cards, then placed it in a separate deck so that I wouldn't see it anymore. So I'd be starting from scratch now, but what I'd be doing differently is I'd be only taking the cards, I'd be making cards out of the vocabulary that I only found in my immersion, and not from the related dictionary entries. I would also use an example sentence from my immersion that I understood to help give me context to understand that vocabulary better. I made tons of leaps and bounds since then, because even though I am learning the same number of new cards every day, they're actually words that I come across in my day-to-day life, and not some random archaic word that I'm never going to use. Now, since I have a small backlog in Mandarin, I'm more motivated than ever to continue learning this language, and it's so much more fun now. The big takeaway of this video is to not worry about trying to memorize every single word in the dictionary, or every single word you come across. So let's say that you have a 1,000 card backlog that you want to get through. You could have your new card threshold be 10 cards a day, so you're learning 10 cards a day. And instead of adding new cards to that, which would increase the backlog, you could immerse, and instead of adding it to Anki, you could just try to memorize it on the point, or on the spot. Yeah, on the spot. You don't have to necessarily learn everything through Anki, because people learn languages without Anki all the time. Now, it might take them longer to learn the language, but people can learn languages without Anki. Immersing in the language is natural space repetition by itself. Anki would just speed up that process. You'll eventually learn these words sooner or later, so don't stress about getting them now. I mean, if you want, try watching a Netflix show or immersing without putting a lot of cards into Anki. Tolerate ambiguity. You might find this less stressful, and you'll learn to enjoy the moment more. That's it for today. If you like this video, then be sure to hit the thumbs up. And you also might like my part 1 to this video, which is where I explained that I used Anki wrong for an entire year. If you dislike the video, then tell me why in the comments. Feel free to follow my Twitter at GeoSpiral to see more language learning updates and when I will post my next videos. See you guys in the next video. This really screwed up my sleep cycle. Motivation can change based on how big your new card Darn it, I hit the microphone. You might recall one of my previous videos called, why is there a bird outside my... The big takeaway from this video is to